welcome back to our workshop. Today we're going to learn about service audit. We're going to learn a way that we can understand all of the information that's been gathered through contextual research. A service artifact is something that's been designed that impacts the experience we have. And to get started, we're going to go to our exercise, a tattoo shop and a tattooing experience. And we're going to understand the artifacts that we've gathered. We'll aggregate them, dissect them into their unique parts, and we'll catalog them. And this is an input into that service stairway. The artifacts are going to serve, and that service audit is going to serve to feed into the rest of the process that we're going to follow. A service artifact audit identifies the things that have been designed in a service, and it's going to highlight the disconnect between company goals and user goals. Really, we're looking to build tacit understanding and tacit knowledge of how a service works. And we're looking to start to identify places where what's been designed and what's expected are not connected, where there's a mismatch between what the company thinks is going on and what the user thinks is going on. And so an audit seems very simple, but it's actually one of the most important parts of our process. Here's how to conduct a service artifact audit. We're going to follow 3 steps, and we'll go through these in detail in just a second. First, you need to collect the service artifacts. There's an expectation here that you've already done qualitative ethnographic research, that you've spent time in the field, that you've gained empathy with your users, that you've researched and performed interviews and contextual inquiries in order to really understand the nuances of their jobs, what they do, why they do it, what their aspirations and fears are. If you haven't done that type of research, you can still do an artifact audit. It just gets a little tricky because fundamental to service design is empathy. And that type of research is going to be the most important way of building empathy. Then we're going to zoom in to identify the modules of each artifact. And that's going to give us the raw material to create a service module catalog. And when we start by collecting these artifacts, we're going to look for artifacts that fall into 6 big buckets. People, physical and digital artifacts, environments, policies, and processes. And each one of these interaction points has a corresponding artifact to it. We typically can't collect people, that doesn't make a lot of sense, but we can collect personas or photographs of people. We might have transcript data that describes a person in some degree of detail, and so we can leverage those artifacts as proxies for the actual person. And the same is going to be true for all of these items. The proxy for a physical artifact is going to be a sketch, and for a digital artifact will be a printout or screenshots. When we think about an environment, we might have a sketch of a top-down view of what the place actually looks like. And when we think about policies and processes, we end up with documents or graphs, charts, different artifacts that represent the actual thing that we watched. Let's take a look at that in a little bit more detail, and we'll start with the idea of people. Identify the people that make up the system. Think first about front of the house employees. These are people that are customer facing. When we talk about front of the house, these are going to be people that actually interact with customers, which means that they have a demeanor that's been, in many respects, designed, that there are various things that shape the way that they interact, the things they say, the things they do, and that those are immediately and obviously noticed by the customer or user. We're also going to include back of the house employees that are not customer facing. And these may be people like maintenance staff or supply and distribution managers. These are people that support that service. And then make sure to include members of the hidden operational units like the business staff or managers and executives. Next, identify the items used during work that relate to physical and digital artifacts. Starting with physical, identify items that are used explicitly. These might be things like a laptop or a filing cabinet or a filing folder. Include printed documents such as reports. These might be notes. Often you'll see a laptop computer with post-it notes all the way around the edge. Those are clear indications of problems. Make sure you get photos of those. And look for items that are customized. When you're thinking about digital artifacts, be sure to include software. Software screenshots are some of the most effective artifacts to gather. You want the actual screens that people use, and if you can't actually get them to take screenshots of them, see if you're allowed to take photographs when you're in the field with them. Include things like websites and emails, and don't forget digital spaces, things like chat rooms or shared documents, SharePoints, and collaborative documentation. When we're talking about environments, we're often talking about buildings and rooms. We might be talking about the movement between spaces as well. Policies and processes are hard to talk about because they're invisible. And so include the explicitly stated rules as things that are documented. They might be documented in a handbook or in a guidelines document. They might also implicitly describe things like hierarchy and power. And it's weird to think about power in a service, but it plays a big role when you're talking about a service employee being able to have autonomy or having volition tempered a little bit by what those rules actually are. And then finally, identify the processes that organize how work occurs. Pay attention to where there's handoffs between team members, physical handoffs of actual objects or artifacts, but also communication handoffs. Think about decision trees where somebody has to make a decision and so they follow sort of a if this, then that way of thinking. And describe the transfer of communication between workers. And so when we were getting started, we talked about a tattoo experience, and that's going to be our example that we use throughout this entire course. Here are some of the artifacts you gathered and your team gathered when they were out doing qualitative research. And you can see a number of different things here. You can see some photographs of somebody getting a tattoo, a website that advertises a particular tattoo studio. We have some flyers, things like tattoo aftercare instructions. You can see the machine that's used to actually do the tattoo in the middle. And it looks like there's a transcript as well. Somebody conducted qualitative research and was able to transcribe everything that happened. Later, when we perform something called service slices, we're going to rely heavily on a transcript. This becomes one of the most important artifacts. But for now, gather all the artifacts, spread them out, and look at each one and give it a unique identifier. You'll see that we've included a letter, A, B, C. We've given each artifact a name, tattoo consent form, transcript, and then a brief description, one sentence that explains what the artifact is and what the value is. And now we're going to zoom in to each artifact in order to identify the different modules that make up that artifact. We're going to use as an example that transcript that I talked about. So here's the transcript. You can see a verbatim representation of what was said. And now you can see circled in red all of the unique utterances that represent touch points. Each place that a customer is interacting with a person, an environment, a policy, and so on gets circled in red, and it's given another unique identifier, D1, D2, D3. Each one of these then becomes a module within the touch point. We can do the same thing with photographs. You'll see here that in one of the photos, there's two different things being highlighted, three different things, the machine, the plastic bag cover, and gloves. And so over time, we're going to aggregate all of these different modules, all of these different zooms in order to create our touchpoint catalog. And each one of those touch points is going to be at a level of module. Think of this as the atomic unit within the larger context. In order to catalog the modules, we're going to create a chart. And the chart is very basic, but it's really important because it's going to serve as the representation of all of the data you have to work with. The chart has a unique ID in the left, and then we're going to give the artifact a name, and that's the touch point. We'll have the module name, which is when we've zoomed into that module, and then we're going to articulate the benefit to both the user, but also to the company. And when there's a disconnect or a frustration, we're going to highlight that. You can see here that we've included all of the tattooing information in that chart, filling in the details of all the components that make up the service. And I'm highlighting here that these three columns are really, really important because when you juxtapose the benefits to a user with the benefits to a company and they're not aligned, we have a really big problem and we have an opportunity for a service to actually make a really big impact. You can see that there's frustrations listed in the right, and often those frustrations are due to a disconnect or a divide between those benefits. We're also going to create a parking lot for design ideas because as you progress through this process, I'm willing to bet that you'll come up with some really good ideas. You're going to see problems and you're going to want to solve them. And we don't want to lose those ideas, but it's also not really time to create the new design ideas yet. In our process, we haven't marinated with the data long enough. So we're going to create a design parking lot where you can write down the ideas, write them with as much detail as possible, link them back to the touch points by using those unique identifiers, and put them on green sticky notes. And we'll do those green sticky notes all the way through the process. So when you're done, you'll have a catalog of them. You'll have just a quantity of good ideas that activate as low-hanging fruit throughout the rest of your process. So it's worth asking at this point in the process, why are we doing this? What is the point of this method? And we'll ask that question all the way through our process. We're creating a service artifact catalog. We're cataloging all of the touch points in order to build tacit knowledge about the service. We want to better understand the service at an almost intuitive level. And we're trying to develop a preliminary understanding of all of the different ways that that service interacts with people in order to identify breakdowns between user benefit and corporate benefit. The service audit is going to translate research into these small discrete units, and we're going to use those units in subsequent phases of service design. Our next step is to slice through the artifacts in order to identify key touch points. And so a service artifact audit identifies the things that have been designed in a service and highlights disconnects between company goals and user goals. It's going to act as the sort of foundation or the fundamentals of our service process. In order to do this, you need to have all of those artifacts, which means that you've done a very sort of comprehensive set of user research, qualitative ethnographic research. You've aggregated all the content, and now we're creating a catalog of modules. And so for your project, first spread out all of the materials you have for our fictional telecom company, Penguin Telecom, and really get to know the content. You'll notice that the content includes transcripts from some research sessions. Pay close attention to the research session that's about the tech support coming to the house to help out. Highlight salient points in that and really pay attention to all the details there. Begin to dissect the artifacts into their modules, and then create that service module catalog so you have a representation of everything that you've gathered, the materials that you've started to explore. I'll join you again soon in order to talk about service slices.